All right, guys. Sean's got to catch a flight. So Sean's got to get rolling. I got nothing else to say. Get rolling. How's everybody done? Good. The sweaty ones are, their heads are up. That's good. Glad to see that. All right, guys. So, Dr. Sean McGovern, we have a clinic out in Scottsdale called Steadfast Integrated Medicine. We do pain, performance, primary care. As a strength conditioning coach for, like we were talking about before, about 20 years. Been involved in CrossFit for a big portion of that, training people remotely for at least the last 12 years. The last 10 years of my duality in my career was looking at the way stress affected the body predominantly from exercise. So functional blood chemistry, working with people, being able to do a lot of labs in that sense to see how that stuff all correlates. So when we think about pain, performance, and just general care, the one thing in common that all those have is cellular health. So we're going to talk about some VO2 max stuff today, a lot of different metrics within that, but less so from the sense of in-season performance and being able to push performance to that next level, but more so on the side of how does this affect your foundations? What does that look like from an off-season standpoint? And what kind of primers do we have to put in place to be able to build the best foundation to take your aerobic capacity to that next level? So in agreement with Gomar and his friends, just looking at VO2 max isn't enough. But if we think about that from the most basic standpoint, from something simple like running, that's the primer, that's the foundation that we can work off. If your running VO2 max is trash, your mix isn't going to be much better. It's probably going to be horrendous compared to that. So we need to keep this in mind from both the cellular standpoint as well as what needs to occur in the off season to then be able to build into in season and be more sport specific. All right. All right. There was supposed to be a clip in here. It didn't work. But we have a couple different premises here. So when we're talking about cellular health, we can think about cells as its normal self. You kind of just have this circle. There's all these lipid bilayers around it that are encircling it. But if the cell doesn't function properly, we'll just put a little circle C here. That means the tissue is not going to function. The organ or gland isn't going to function. The system isn't going to function. And you're not going to function that great. You can think of every one of the cells in your body as a business. If your workers come in drunk, they're not going to do a good job. If only 60% of the people come in, there's not going to be a lot of productivity, things, there isn't going to be a good flow, and that is how all of these, this kind of taxonomy works within the body. The cells don't do their job, everything else isn't. And ATP, as Gomar was talking about, this is our energy currency. And generally for us, we think, ATP, muscle contractions, performance, but this is all the way down to a cellular level of moving water in and out of the cell. Having tissues secrete specific hormones, peptides, things like that. So if it can't just work energetically the way that it should, how is it going to work systemically throughout the entire body and get like mobile tasks completed at higher levels? If we're going to quantify performance, this is being able to do a task, complete it, and then do it at a level that matters, right? And for athletes, that's a high level with very intricate. You get more mitochondria per cell. If you can get more mitochondria per cell, your density goes up, your ability to have oxidative phosphorylation or be able to use aerobic metabolism more effectively is going to go through the roof. Without which, it's going to suffer, and you're going to switch over to carbohydrates prematurely within a workout and be less effective and essentially decrease performance, have a peak power drop a lot sooner than your counterpart that is managing all those things. So the flexibility of your metabolism, I hate that buzzword, but we generally think about that around the idea of nutrition. So how you're timing carbs or fats or semi-fasted around different facets of training, that's going to affect which enzymes are being released in the body and how effectively you can use them, right? So if you're a more fat adapted person, you're going to burn fat more effectively because you're going to have more of those enzymes available versus somebody that is on a high carb, all day carb diet. And the chemistry behind that is the more carbs that are present, the more enzymes are going to be in that tissue and available to start processing that and work that into ATP down the line. So you want to be able to favor both sides of that. So the title of this presentation was the convergence point, and that's really thinking about how do we maximize the ability to burn fat at the highest level while not taking away from our ability to burn carbs. Because you need carbs at that higher output. As we saw in the previous chart that Gomar had, like that's from phosphocreatine to carbs, that's where the bulk energy is going to be made, and it fell off as we went to the right. And it falls off because there's a time delinquency within there. You get more ATP per fat gram, but it's at a slower rate, and that does not supply high performances, right? You need fast energy going fast, not a lot of energy coming in slow. So you got to kind of create that dichotomy of that, of carbs are fast but not abundant, and fat is abundant but not fast. There's a lot of repeating sounds in there, if everybody's still with me on that, all right? And when we go on lower carb diets or insufficient carbs for the sport and we're burning through those, we then start to increase basal levels of cortisol. What happens with that is over longer periods of time that will start to tank your thyroid. Thyroid starts to tank, and you're going to compromise your ability to have efficient and density within your mitochondria and produce energy appropriately for the sport, body composition, general health, whatever the case may be. All right. So within the cells, all of our drunk employees and whatnot, we're shooting for sober employees that show up on time. We have all types of different things that we could address, down to the endoplasmic reticulum, the stability of the membrane, what other things are floating around in there that can help create energy. You can think of things like CoQ10 or something as simple as magnesium. So I'm sure everybody at one point in this room has probably supplemented magnesium, right? Does anyone know what magnesium does inside the cell? I'll take guesses.
Makes me sleepy.
Can. So very interestingly, with magnesium, when it's in its free form or ionic, it actually binds to ATP and prevents it from spontaneously turning into ADP plus phosphate. So just floating around in the cell, it can just spontaneously disassociate and you lost energy. Magnesium comes in, binds, protects it from disassociating, and now you have more active ATP within your system. So just deficiencies from a nutrient standpoint can cause these problems as well. So we want to think about all those factors, and as we run through some of these upcoming markers, I'm more looking at this from a cellular health standpoint of what are the things that are missing and what aspects that we can look at from blood markers is going to impact each of these metrics and essentially allow you to go to that next level, improve those things, and be a more fit aerobically or aerobically fit athlete. Cool? Lots of insight. Social friendly science, that may or may not happen. But we'll, just for time's sake, we'll keep those things simple. And honestly, I want you guys to be able to walk away with a bunch of things. I think in clinic, we look at over 80 different markers for people when we do a performance workup for them. That's nearly impossible to kind of just take on your own and be able to track those things over time. But for any one of you guys, the biggest thing is going to be gravitating to those ones that really like light bulb goes off in your head, and you're like, that's me. That's a portion of one of the obstacles to me podium, right? So in that case, look at what those parameters, think about the things that are associated with that and what things you can either add to your diet, your training, or think about from a lifestyle standpoint that'll help bolster or support that aspect of your training, all right? All right, so a couple of big ones. My big three axes, fat max. So fat max, if you're looking at VO2 max respiratory exchange rate, this is like you have a 0.7 all the way to a 1. This is technically 100% carbs. This is, I'm sorry, fat. And this is technically 100% carbohydrates. It's likely that all these things are still going on, just not at abundant rates. So your respiratory exchange rate on a VO2 max test is looking at, it's registering the amount of carbon that you're breathing out, and based off of that, it's telling you at X heart rate and intensity, how much are you burning fat versus how much are you burning carbs, all right? And the more you're towards 0.7 and the longer you stay on that side of it, the more you're burning fat, and you're effectively doing the most important thing. What I think for CrossFit is you're sparing glycogen for the more intense parts, all right? Our crossover point is at about 0.85, where the predominant fuel substrate becomes carbohydrates. That could be 0.51, right? So once it's predominantly more carbohydrates, you've shifted and you're no longer effectively burning fat. And that's based off of intensity. So the fat max is the point in which, if we're looking at a timeline here and the heart rate's going up, and you can have your aerobic threshold here, your anaerobic threshold here, somewhere around this area is going to be your fat max. And at that heart rate, or that band within your heart rate, plus or minus about 5 beats per minute, you're going to have the highest oxidative level of fat producing the most energy. So we can look at that as a grams per minute. All right, so when we think about this from a cellular level, if your grams per minute is 0.4, you have probably issues in your carnitine shuttle, your ability to like move fat into the cell. There's likely issues with cofactors within the cell itself to produce or generate energy from fat. And there may even be a density component to just not having a lot of mitochondria per that cell. All right, so as we work on those things, this can all get shifted to the right, and you can get more work accomplished with using less and less sugar. All right, now what that does is generate more energy at more moderate intensities. And that spares all that excess glucose for later on in the workout when things are really getting hard and your heart rate's starting to rip through your chest, right? So the importance of this is not only looking at when that happens, when that max amount of fat can be burned, but also the rate in which it is. 0.3, 0.4 grams per minute is pretty low. You can get this up to about 0.7, 0.8, even 0.9 for more advanced athletes in that realm. So when we think about that, that shows that there's another factor in here on how efficient your mitochondria work. Now, if you guys were here last week, you heard me last camp. We talked about polyunsaturated fatty acids, free radicals, things that chew up cellular membranes. So in the sense of a cell having a lipid bilayer, that protects it and helps create your electromagnetic gradient inside and outside of the cell. For you guys, you go, he's saying a bunch of stupid words, this isn't helping me get better at thrusters and burpees. For me, I'm like, well, if there's a leak here, the gradients off and your ability to fire things appropriately no longer works. And when we go down to the mitochondria side of it, when we're trying to move protons from one side of the membrane to the other to generate ATP, if there's holes in that and protons are leaking out, you're wasting energy and you're not making ATP. So that's another insufficiency in here. Now, magnesium's not going to solve that problem, excuse me, but having quality fats in your diet will. So focusing on saturated fats and monounsaturated fats will help, as that's what's used to create these membranes. Now, if you look up polyunsaturated fatty acids in a medical journal, textbook, wherever, Wikipedia perhaps, depending on who runs that these days, that's too bad. The first thing it says about it 9 times out of 10 is these fatty acids are highly susceptible to oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is rusting of our cells. So all the fish oil they tell you to chew down every day, we're building our cells out of that along with cholesterols. So you have to ask yourself, like, okay, are we bringing in constituents that are then going to line our mitochondria in our cells and make us less efficient at creating energy and having more oxidative stress and needing more antioxidants to solve that problem? It's contentious, but I'd say absolutely. So all of these things contribute to the cellular health, which then allow us to do things at higher levels, all right? That was a bit of a tangent just for Fat Max, but those are things that go into us being effective at those levels. Training, nutrition, timing, those are all things that are going to shift that to the right and make us more effective at it. Now our Carb Max on the other side, that's where you have above 1 and technically 100% burning carbs. As I noted at the beginning, this is going to be dependent on your thyroid. This is going to be dependent on how deep you can go into that intensity. Now, as you guys have probably noticed, like if you've done a running VO2 max test, you probably won't even hit max heart rate. You'll probably fatigue out before you even get there. But if you looked at the RER on there, you're probably somewhere between 1.1 and 1.3 more times than not in fully utilizing that. Now, the issue here is how fast do you utilize that, and at what level do we then start to see that number drop, because the amount of oxygen that we can get in isn't sufficient to continually convert carbs into ATP essentially and generate that, and thus our byproduct becomes lactate, which our friend explained very eloquently, can then leave the cell, grab a hydrogen, become lactic acid, and then be used elsewhere or go back to the liver and be converted to glycogen and then dumped back into the system as a sugar, right? So there's a process to all of that. So all of these things are factors. The thyroid, which controls your body temperature, that's going to improve the probability of all these little molecules running into them, put them in states where they're more receptive to these things. And again, a warm body temperature. Where your body temperature is in the morning when you wake up is indicative of the strength of your thyroid. If you're waking up and it's like 96.8 for our Americans, I don't know what that is in Celsius, you're cold, whether you feel cold or not, and your thyroid's underperforming based off of that, which means you're at a deficiency of being able to produce and maintain healthy mitochondria, which is going to then produce your energy later. So tracking things like that, first thing in the morning, pick it up, scan your forehead before you even roll over, get that temp, write it down, get a trend. See where you are in that training session and how that's affecting your thyroid health, because that is a great subjective, or for that matter, objective factor that'll tell you if you're going into an overtraining season or if cortisol is too high and it's starting to pull down our ability to have a healthy thyroid, thus giving us a robust resting metabolic rate and ability to synthesize energy, okay? Having a low polyunsaturated fatty acid diet. If you guys track your food, I'd imagine a good portion of you do. I don't know if MyFitnessPal or any of those other ones that are more commercially available tell you omega-3, omega-6 breakdowns and things like that, or if it's just monosaturated and poly within there. But Chronometer does. It'll break that down for you. Free software, plugging them. I don't make money on them. I just think it's a great tool. That will actually break those things down and let you know. You want to keep that. I think generally we recommend in clinic about less than 5 grams per day, which if you're not dosing yourself with 3 grams of fish oil every day, it's usually pretty easy to do. When we put all of these together, our fat max is ultimately going to determine our sub-maximal output. This is great for training, right? Testing, you want to be able to bolster that as a foundation, but ultimately having a good sub-maximal aerobic base is what's going to allow you to do the appropriate volume of training required for the sport. Is anybody under the impression that CrossFit is not a high volume sport in one way or another? Brennan, average amount of events in a weekend comp?
Games is 12.
There we go. Okay, not a lot of volume. Low volume, right? Low intensity too, right? And obviously volume and intensity just marry each other perfectly. You're supposed to have high volume and high intensity at the same time, right? It's the perfect recipe for burning out. Being facetious, guys. Insert laugh. Carb max is really what allows you to get to the highest maximum output. Again, so being, as Gomar noted, being on a low carb diet, you're never going to be able to hit maximums, right? You're not going to be able to have that highest output on that side of it. And then Where your thyroid is indirectly related to your state of stress and cortisol, which is going to affect your recovery all in all. So poor recovery is generally correlated with high cortisol levels. And if anyone feels stressed, there's a chance that you are stressed and have higher levels of cortisol. So adding more training on that, intermittent fasting, going low carb, being in a long-term calorie restriction, stress, more cortisol, less thyroid, less mitochondria, less performance, stop crossing fitting, because you can't even do it anymore. Simple as that. All right, basically said all that stuff. Waking temperature, you want it higher than 97.8. Again, kind of touched on all this stuff. Makes it really easy to use fat at a moderate energy output. You can sprint on your glucose, which can look like a sprint in any aspect of a Metcon for that matter. And then generally, the combination of being able to have both sides of that fence covered just gives you better health in general as a baseline. All right, so mitochondrial density, talked about this momentarily. This is the amount of mitochondria you can shove into one cell. So the more the merrier, really is no downside to it. Can you run out of energy faster? Yeah, but if you're running that much mitochondria and going that hard, you're probably eating sufficiently, and if you weren't, you'd probably start to kill off some of those anyways. So shouldn't be an effect there. CPT1, so this is what I noted before on the carnitine side. So there's a handful of factors here. Thyroid has a factor, testosterone has a factor. Everybody should have testosterone. CrossFitters shouldn't have low testosterone. If they do, you're overworking and your cortisol is busting that entire axis. How well your hormonal state is going to directly impact even your ability to move fat into the mitochondria and use it as energy. So the carnitine shuttle, for that matter, can be bolstered by throwing in additional L-carnitine, L-tortrate into the diet, which will help that mechanism kind of band-aid that approach until you get hormones back online and start to nudge the body back into its homeostasis to allow the best level of that. Similarly, doing enough zone 2 work is an effective way to stimulate the body to increase the amount of these CPT1 transits, as those need to be genetically basically told to be transcribed, created, and plugged into that membrane so that you can move stuff. It sounds really dorky, I know, but the more effectively this stuff goes, the higher that fat max, the higher those grams per minute you can burn through and generate more energy. This is a sport about having the maximal amount of energy, and training too hard, not being meticulous, and I'm not talking about doing lab work every month and being a dork about your nutrition to a level where it's like orthorexic and now getting in the way of your life, but being purposeful and having intent behind those things, not just saying like, well, I'm a CrossFitter, I should be going really hard, and I shouldn't care about how high my cortisol levels. It's like, that's the dumbest thing I've heard. That is going to directly make your performance worse, and if it's not happening now, it will eventually. It's only a matter of time. It's not if, it's when. 100% on that. All right, so easily just doing 45 to 60 minutes of true zone 2 work at your fat max, so that's generally within there. Go, Mar.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
How do you see zone 2 work? Do you see it structurally on the bike or rower?
100%. Yeah, so
Can you like transfer it to using functional movements as well? Or how do you see that?
Yeah, so obviously going prone is going to adjust your heart rate, right? Going inverted is going to adjust it. So my focus on this specifically is off season, right? So how do we bolster this in off season? Again, creating the best base would be either cycling or running, because it's the lowest. Obviously running has a skill level, but it's the easiest to accomplish and control pace, especially if you're on a treadmill, and be able to look and get instant feedback on where your heart rate is and control that. Doing burpees, kettlebell swings, ski erg, anything that is remotely repeatable in a zone 2 intensity, unfortunately will create a lot of variables in body position, which will then change blood pressure, heart rate, and things like that. So for an off-season approach, I would stick to monostructural or machines that give you instant feedback and allow to control that pace. Whereas you start to become more sport-specific, you can slowly start to weave in other movements, predominantly in the sagittal plane, that will allow you to kind of stay upright and start to utilize that same heart rate without too much variation to it. 45 to 60 minutes in zone 2, 2 sessions of that weekly, and then ensuring that ferritin levels are above 40. From a blood perspective, this is our storage form of iron. This can go up with infection and inflammation, so we want to make sure that our optimal range is generally about 70 to 110. If we can get in that range and stay in there, that would be optimal, that we know it's not inflammation that's driving, the body actually has a good amount of store of that. Iron's needed for hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's part of your red blood cells. It's going to transport all of that oxygen for you and make sure that you can get oxygen to cells and carbon dioxide back out of the cells appropriately at the highest level so that we can continue.
Ferritin is for males. Does it include females?
This is just for pure cellular health. So women's ranges are a little bit, they can be, but ultimately we want to be greater than just 40 in general. Otherwise, we want to be able to look at an iron panel, make the adjustments appropriately to get iron levels back up, ensure that there is a storage level appropriate for it. Because with aerobic oxidation, we are going to run through red blood cells at a slightly higher level, and we want to make sure as we're cranking out new cells, we have what we need for hemoglobin and to create all those functional units.
How do you measure? Just through blood work?
Yep, yeah. Simple blood work. Ferritin's a regular marker, nothing special about it. It's maybe $6-7 US, if that. Liver glycogen. So again, especially with more specialized diets these days, people are saying to stay away from sugars. Obviously starches, vegetables are fine. We want more glucose, less fructose, things like that. So our order of operations, we have local glucose in the muscle. When that starts to run out, and as that's starting to run out, we have glycogen in the muscle. That starts to break down and gets into glucose. We use that. As those start to deplete, it starts to pull it in from the blood, usually congruent with that process. As blood levels start to go down, the liver then starts to break down its glycogen, sends it into the system, and so on and so forth. So when the liver runs out and your glucose levels are then low, cortisol has to continue to go up to help force more gluconeogenesis, create more sugar, and thus the more frequently this happens, the more its precursor cortical releasing hormone starts to jam up your thyroid, and on the flip side of it will start to slow down your entire reproductive system, thus throwing women's cycles off and decreasing testosterone for both men and female. If women have low estrogen, they inherently already have low testosterone. So very easy to figure that out, especially when recovery is slow and your ability to put mass on with a hypocaloric diet is not present. All right. Simple fixes for that: ensure that you do have some fructose going into the system. That'll go straight to the liver, help start to build up that glycogen store. Again, we're talking about creating sustainable health foundations so that you can bolster performance later. When you're training specific modalities, there may be a slightly different approach to get more glucose into the system faster, to recover glycogen stores in the muscles, and lead to performance into the next session of your training day. But in this scenario, we're setting up backup systems to make sure that you don't tank your thyroid and cause all the cellular hell that we talked about at the opening. Okay? AM cortisol levels need to be under 18. That's another blood marker. You get this done before 9 a.m. in the morning, fasted. This will give us a good idea of what those numbers look like. Our clinic's optimal range is 8 to 15. 18 is kind of upper limit for athletes. After that, you're really starting to look at a higher estimated daily cortisol output, which can then lead to further issues as we're expecting in the havoc that it creates within the gonads and the thyroid within there. So got to keep it tightly dialed, and especially if it's off season, we're looking at creating all the foundations to continue to be able to build through the season without hitting any pitfalls and prematurely having to stop for whatever reason or pivot. Pyruvate dehydrogenase. You guys don't care about that. But it does have a direct relationship with T3 and calcium levels to activate that and be able to shuttle acetyl-CoA, move pyruvate into the correct direction to utilize the most amount of energy possible within our cells when oxygen isn't present. Again, when this is dialed, you're going to see a seamless shift from going from a cruise in your Metcon or your training into something that is more grindy, heavy, and difficult, right? So this is that little point when you're like, all right, this was somewhat easy and manageable, and now it's hard, nothing else has really changed. That's that shift in your metabolism near and around that crossover effect where we start to predominantly work towards carbs. We need to make sure that we have adequate thyroid hormone to activate the particular enzymes that allow you to use both fat and carbs appropriately. Getting enough carbs in, sucrose is glucose and fructose, so it's a little combination in there. Having 5 grams of essential amino acids 20 minutes before a workout is helpful in the same sense to bolster that. And doing quarterly to bi-yearly thyroid check-ins with labs to make sure that your T3 numbers are appropriate, because a lot of athletes, and particularly ones that sweat a lot and are on their endurance side, not only are you going to have lower iron and potentially ferritin levels, but you're also going to see a poor conversion of T4 to T3 on the hormonal side, which is then going to tank your normal T3 levels. So when the thyroid makes thyroid hormone, 80% of it is T4, which is inactive, 20% of it is active, T3, and it has to go to the gut, the liver, and other cells to make that conversion. And iron amongst vitamin A, D, glutathione, selenium are all cofactors in allowing that conversion to happen. So if those aren't present or you're running low on any of those, all the T4 in the world isn't going to matter if you can't convert it to T3, activate it, and make all your cells happy, because every single cell in your body has thyroid receptors and needs it. So that's a huge piece on that. Lactic recycling loop. So we have our convergence point. I'm sorry, our crossover point. So where that happens, let's just say this is 60 beats per minute. This is 190, all right? If you're burning 85, which is right where our crossover is and predominantly going into carbs at 90 beats per minute, there is very little chance that any of the triglycerides floating around in your body, any of the available adipose tissue, your fat that can contribute to energy supply is ever going to be able to be used in a workout. That's a problem, right? Because that's a lot of usable energy for things that are just floating around. So the faster your body shifts into this, the less effective it is at working through this entire process. So again, focusing on simple things like zone 2, getting the proper nutrition to it, going into those semi-fasted, having a good hormonal balance are all things that are going to nudge that, so you can go in and say at 130, then start to just cross over that line and start shifting into predominant carbohydrate use. It's a huge factor in here, and that's going to decrease the amount of lactate that's put out, and then ultimately it's going to be the strength of your cardiovascular system, how clean your liver is, and ultimately your nutrient and lymph systems that are going to bolster that to ensure that you can continue to move waste appropriately, get it out of the body, get it to the liver, and let the liver do its job, create new sugar for you. Otherwise, you're going to hit. What are you guys looking at for a lactic threshold? 7 millimoles per liter?
That's kind of worms you open.
All right, we'll keep it that from traditional sense. So generally we look once the person can't clear and go across that line, then we're suggesting that that's around that lactic threshold and the body is no longer recycling that lactate fast enough. And there's many of things that contribute to it. Often is going to be, the ability for them to bring air in and supply the tissue that's available based off of that. So actions to help bolster this: cool down until your heart rate's at less than 120 BPMs. So slowly ramping back down, ensuring that keeping a higher cardiovascular output post-workout is going to work through that shuttling process and reteach your autonomic nervous system on how to tolerate higher levels of lactate, deal with them, and then start to make preemptive changes in your enzymes in your system to better bolster outputs on the next workout. Right? If we have events that we're having back-to-back, if they're local things and there's maybe only 45 to 90 minutes in between events, your recovery is key in between those. And the longer that takes, the worse off you're going to be, the more energy that's going to be expended. Because that O2 debt that you worked up that has to balance all that lactate that's floating around is going to cost you in energy for your lungs and your heart to bring in vast more amounts of oxygen until that debt is supplied and secured, right? And that's a lot of energy wasted. That's a lot of energy that you could have used going into your next workout. So slowly ramping down. If you finish a workout, you look at your heart rate monitor, your watch, whatever, your Whoop, and it's like you're at 165. Jump on a bike, pedal until you get below 120, arbitrary number, but good place to start, so that you continue to flush, move, and use your cardiovascular system accordingly to work through that. Magnesium, vitamin K, good things to bolster on a normal day for multiple reasons. And then if we were testing or looking at numbers, at our place we like to see less than 6 millimoles per liter at a 2-minute mark of recovery. So you finish a hard workout, 2 minutes after, we want to see a nice dip after that into an area where that's suggestive that the body is now back to a level where it can flush and move that stuff. Yes, sir?
What form of magnesium do you recommend, and what role does potassium play?
Potassium's on the opposite side of the electromagnetic gradient with sodium. So there's a lot of contentious literature on what that ratio should look like. Generally, most of our supplementation on electrolytes is going to be heavy on sodium, moderate on potassium. When they kill people in jail, what do they call that? Yeah, it's my understanding. I don't know why I couldn't think of what that was. I'm pretty sure it's like a high dose potassium. So, right, so it stops, it's like that other side of it, right? So generally you never find potassium in real high dosage, probably for that reason or other things. But generally I've seen 2-to-1 potassium sodium ratios be ideal. But then on the sports hydration side, you can see as high as 4-to-1 sodium potassium because you have a higher likelihood of sweating out sodium opposed to the potassium. So it's a little individualized. I'd say run a protocol, run your electrolytes on a comprehensive metabolic panel. They're like $14, and you'll see what your electrolytes look like, and you tweak based off of that until you get in the right place. Magnesium, generally for most athletes like you guys, glycinate's going to be the best way to get it into the muscle. If you're having trouble sleeping, 3-8 is a great version. If you're getting, what was the other one that we do?
Oxide?
That makes you crap your pants. Yeah. We don't like that one. Yeah, we never use that. Taurate we use for cardiovascular health. Just gets the heart better for whatever reason. And if we're having a lot of palpitations throughout the day or hypertension, things like that, I'm not suggesting that for hypertension, this is medical advice, but that's an option. So there's a couple good tri-blends. There's companies that put out like a taurate, glycinate, 3-8 combo, which is usually pretty solid product.
When would you take those? So like, would you prefer like take it in the morning or take it like right after the workout, or when?
Glycinate, for like my bodybuilding population, I have them take it with breakfast. If it's an off day, with breakfast. If it's a training day, post-workout is usually really good. All right, we talked about this, excess linoleic acid. This is our PUFAs, our polyunsaturated fatty acids. It has a bit of an issue oxidizing cardiolipin, which is a huge component to intramitochondrial health. We're not going to go down that too deep, but again, limiting our polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-3s to less than omega-3s, 6s, all that crap, under 5 grams per day. You want to get rid of your seed oils. They are in half the products, if not more, at Whole Foods. If you go there, Sprouts, all those types of places, all of your healthy protein bars probably have them. Soy oil is just as bad. It really makes it hard to just live and get anything done. But extra virgin olive oil, macadamia, avocado and avocado oil, saturated fats, coconut is fantastic, and it's antimicrobial. There's a lot of good stuff for us. Those are kind of the go-tos in that category that you can replace, cook with, do all those types of things and not run into any issues. Similarly, we run a marker all the time for most of our patients and athletes. HSCRP is high sensitivity CRP, that's C-reactive protein. This used to be a marker predominantly for cardiovascular health, but generally now we're seeing it indicated in any case or patient that has low grades of chronic inflammation. So we want to see that number under 1. Below 0.5 would be really good marker that there's not a lot of inflammation, either cellular or tissue-based in the individual. I'd say most CrossFitters come in probably around 2 to 3 when I see them. So there's a lot of room to pick up both on the cellular level and tissue level for that matter. So that can be inflammation from training, or that can be gut stress. It can be a handful of different things. Remember, oxidative stress is coming from drinking, smoking, over-exercising, calorie restriction. Anytime you don't have the amount of resources needed to combat the damage that you're doing from exercising. Oxidative stress, respiratory stress from using fat does cause free radicals, and you need to be able to combat that with resources that can clean that up and capitalize on that. And that's generally why I do love carbohydrates so much, is they don't generally cause as much damage as fats do. You just get more abundant energy from fats, and if you utilize them appropriately and have good cellular health and mitochondria density, then that's going to in and of itself solve its own problems and be a less self-limiting model that'll allow you to perform at a higher level. Talked about waking temp, heart rate. So even looking at trends of your resting heart rate, if you guys have Whoops or Oura rings or any of those cool things, looking at trends to that long term is great. A lot of insight. I know I've shared with a bunch of you guys personally at some point that I can predict when I'm going to be sick based off of changes in my resting heart rate. Like on a good cycle, if I'm taking care of myself, resting heart rate's like 43. If I wake up and it's 54, I have the flu by the end of the day, or a sinus infection, or something like clockwork. It'll happen that day. So that can at least give you ideas of where you're trending depending on how run down you're feeling. And correlate that with your cycle. Talk to your coaches or look at your program if you're not with a coach on like, how long is this cycle? Let's track my resting heart rate or HRV through that cycle and follow the trend of it. If it's starting to dive on the HRV side or go through the roof on the HR side, then probably going towards overreaching, which you can come back from, but if you keep going that route, you're looking at overtraining and then probably doing more damage than you are helping, for that matter. Heart rate less than 60, I'm sure most of you have that for resting. And again, good temperature above 97.8. For our in-house athletes back home, if any of them have numbers worse than those, we cut their volume by 20%. Simple as that. No matter what you're doing that day, you're either knocking off 20% of the reps, 20% of the sets, 20% of the distance or time or whatever the case may be, while still sustaining that same output that you're looking for, just as a safeguard. Put a little central governor in there. Don't let them go too hot. Helps clear that up, gets them back into those numbers that we're looking for. Reiterating that a little bit. Post 75-minute zone 2. Let's go zone 2 for 75 minutes. Depp said nope. So good control of glucose, see how effective you are. If you have low testosterone, which if you're on a high volume, high intensity program, you probably have lower testosterone. That also contributes to the amount of GLUT4 transports we have for all of our cells. So those are the little tunnels that let sugar in. If your T's low, you have less tunnels. Even when insulin binds, there's less tunnels that are going to plug in and suck in sugars. We put people on testosterone, they suck down all the sugar in the world. Their A1Cs get better, their fasting glucose gets better, their insulin gets better. It's magic. But you can get those numbers up without giving some tea.
Oh, just checking my Whoop. It says
Are you alive?
90, whatever, like 90 is body temperature. And I was wondering if it's individual dependent. Like you said, it should be above 97.8. I'm like way below that.
You're dead. That's like clinically dead. So I think you might want to recalibrate that bad boy.
But the heart rate is like 48
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, 90 degrees Fahrenheit would be like, what do we call that? Hypothermia.
Mine started something on 93.7. And I was like,
That's interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's wrong.
I hope it's wrong, because I'm talking to you. And that would make all of us completely insane having a conversation with you.
Are men different with the basal body temperature? Are men and women different?
You're going to be a little warmer during your luteal phase. Other than that, it should be pretty dialed. Yeah. And you should be able to track that. You could use luteinizing strips to go along with that and just see if that correlates. For non-cycling females, you should be pretty much dialed in the same place. But again, hormonal health is going to affect all of that, and generally lower numbers below that is indicative of just general thyroid health, because our body has a set temperature. It was made completely by accident over 100 billion mutations that went wrong in cells, and then we came from bacteria, right? Just total accident. Anybody? Someone? Right? Accident? No, we were designed perfectly and set to be at a body temperature that allows enzymes and substrates to interact perfectly. So when we're not at that, our body fights and uses energies to try to correct for that, to get back to a state in which it can do those things. And that's all the way down to acid-base ratio, temperature. What was the other big factor in there? O2 versus CO2, all those things. So it's constantly going to try to correct for that. Why this one's in CrossFit? We're going to spare glucose for the end of the workout or the more intense parts, especially if you have a run, heavy lift run scenario. Be aerobic during the runs, use your sugars during the heavy parts. Makes sense to me, right? Sounds like a game plan. Faster between events. That's important, right? We got factors that look directly at that. And then longevity. Lower chronic cortisol also means less injuries. The more cortisol you have pumping through your body just at a basal level, right? So generally we would look at this and we kind of see a curve like this. So if your curve is constantly getting higher and higher as time goes on, even if you got a nice curve, you got a pretty circadian rhythm going, doesn't matter, right? If you did the area under that curve, you're releasing more cortisol throughout the day, and chronic cortisol is inflammatory. When it's acute, and you just have, say, your regular curve here, and you just have little acute bursts within there that are recoverable, those are anti-inflammatory, funny enough. So it's paradoxical. When you have low, steady amounts with acute bursts, it's anti-inflammatory, solves a lot of problems for us. When you have gross amounts of net chronic cortisol, it becomes inflammatory and starts to break things down, especially in your cerebral cortex. You start forgetting stuff, your memory turns into garbage. Your cerebellum that Joe talked about earlier, funny enough. Anyone ever get really stressed or tired and they like drop stuff constantly, walk into doorways, things like that, like your coordination's off? Ooh, do we need coordination in this sport, anybody?
Yes.
A little bit, right? Coordination goes down, timing's off, agility's shot, speed on the barbell, bye-bye, right? Because now you're sleep shot. And yeah.
Do adaptogens help with the cortisol?
Yes. So adaptogens are great botanical herbs that actually nourish the glands rather than just band-aid them. So if you took a magic drug that suppressed your cortisol and kept it down, the minute you stopped taking it, it would go right back to where it was. Where adaptogenic herbs allow actually nurturing of that and kind of reprogram them to be more response specific. Rhodiola is a great one for athletes generally on the endurance side, where you're going to expect to have higher levels, but then also helps control for like emotional and psychological stress, so that we're not dumping tons on that and kind of reserving it for more of a sport output. Great question. No time for that. All right. We're not even going to get through like half of these slides. And this was like my lowest amount of slides I ever put out too. It's incredible. All right. Yeah, something like that.
Does ashwagandha help with cortisol? Is that
Tremendously.
or is that something different?
What's up?
Is ashwagandha an adaptogen?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know.
That's a great one for virtually, I mean, everybody's more indicated for one versus a different one, so no like gross easy answer for that, but I'd say more than half of our folks are generally using ashwagandha either in the morning or at night.
Can you write that one on the board?
Yeah. I'll probably spell it wrong, but it'll be close enough to Google.
What's a better
Ashwagandha,
drink
yeah.
in the morning or?
Depends on the person. If you like don't tolerate like work stress really well, you can take it in the morning, or if you just need to be able to wind down better at night, you can take it, tired and wired at the end of the day. It's great at night to kind of tone things down. VO2 max, I'll leave you guys with the bigger notes to read, but we'll kind of just talk about a couple factors here. So for your tire VO2 max, keeping track of your hemoglobin, ferritin, and albumin levels within blood work, ensuring that they're within at least lab ranges, if not optimal ranges, is going to be ideal. You can supplement iron, vitamin C to help get those back in. 1 liter of milk per day, protein and calcium, great thing to bolster that as well if you tolerate dairy.
Whole milk or?
Preferably. Got a lot of good saturated fats in there, stabilize all those membranes. Absolutely. Fat max we talked about. Things that you can track is your fasting insulin numbers, your A1C. You can get real fancy and spend a lot of money and look at your NAD to NADH ratio. I wouldn't expect anybody to do that, but that also suggests that with aging athletes and people that have had real reckless lifestyles, infusions or sub-Q injections of NAD can be really beneficial on that, just to help bolster that whole process of making ATP and having those pre-cofactors on the electron transport side prepped and ready to go. Low NAD will result in a slow beta oxidation. That's your energy pathway that allows you to burn fat. So NAD is a great supplement. You can get it compounded for injection. They have nasal sprays available. There's some good sublingual ones out there. Not going to call out any names. There's a lot of crappy ones as well. So be careful, do your research, look at third-party research for that. If you don't have a doc that can inject it for you. It's not a banned substance. It's literally just a form of niacin. It varies. You can email me. For NMN, which is like the step right before that, 500 milligrams before a zone 2 workout could be super beneficial to help bolster that. Lactic threshold, looking at blood CO2, vitamin D levels, interleukin 6, which is an inflammatory marker. We generally just run CRP or ESR for that. Some states won't run ESR, so CRP or high sensitivity CRP is a great one for that. Adiponectin would be another one, especially for overweight athletes or folks that have sluggish weight loss. High IL-6 or CRP numbers would show that you're probably going to have a very early lactic threshold compared to your counterpart with better numbers in that area. 4 grams of EPA, DHA. I know I just said I hate fish oil, but you can't argue with science. That's the recommendation on there, unfortunately. And sunlight helps kind of shift everything to the right on that side. So you gotta choose your battles on that one. Your tau of VO2, so how fast you shift gears in your VO2. And that's ultimately how that periodically goes up, what that slope looks like. Again, IGF-1 levels, free T3, creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is a nice little enzyme that restores your creatine phosphate levels, and when the cell gets damaged, predominantly from like higher intensity, high percentage lifts, the cells start to leak this enzyme, and we use it as kind of a post-workout recovery marker. It's not a great marker, but we at least know there's cellular damage occurring that you can then recover from, and then on repeat bouts, you should see lower levels of that. Peptides and heavy eccentrics can help with that. You guys aren't supposed to do peptides because you play in CrossFit, so we can't talk about that, but it's noted on there. Forgot to take that out. HR recovery. So this is probably one of the most important ones. We call this the tau of phosphocreatine. So this is how fast you can pull down your sympathetic tone and get you more parasympathetic after a high intensity bout. All right, so you finish a row at 180, and let's just say that was like maximal effort for you. How long does it take to get you down approximately within 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes? You know, what that's indicative of changes a lot of things. We typically want to see a 20 to 30 BPM drop within the first minute, or an 8 to 10% drop in your VO2 max within that same time if you're taking the test and running through that. That, you know, for CrossFitters is going to be a huge piece on ladders, anything where you have ascending loads, things like that, where your body's able to go really hard, go intense, be able to recover, get the heart rate back down, and then go into that next one. Think anything in an EMOM fashion, even death by, things like that. Like, faster recovery the better, get that heart rate down, don't waste those nutrients and all those supplies that you need. Mike McElroy in the back with the hat.
60-second recovery, does posture of your recovery obviously matter?
You know, interestingly enough, you guys remember like running stupid drills in grade school and the teachers were like, put your hands up here, right? And they're like, it helps open up your lungs. I don't know if it actually does that, but what it does do is when you raise your hands, you get a faster blood dump, it gets to your central mass, and it actually makes you more parasympathetic, which is awesome. So that is a nice contributing factor to that. So if you want to walk around like this after your workout, like, it's going to be hard, and everyone's going to think you're a whack, but it might help.
Why is it not your tendency to do this, or like, you know, that's what we all do after?
It's a great question. I'm sure if it just feels better,
Good.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple respiratory diseases or infections where leaning forward actually opens up the trachea and that whole chest cavity and makes it easier to get air in. So it could be emulating that as well, if I had to guess. Yeah. But keep the airwaves open. Really? Really? Oh, interesting. Look at that. Oh, that's awesome. I'll have to look it up now. That's super cool. Nice. So it's nice. It's got to open up that respiratory drive then. That's cool. Factors that we see changing all this is obviously cortisol. We talked about that AM cortisol and its effect on recovery, and that's intraset, intra-workout recovery as well. DHEAS, which is a precursor to both cortisol, and it has a play in our androgen index, which is going to contribute to testosterone. Your inflammation markers, high sensitivity CRP, high cortisol in general is going to create a poor reset from set to set, workout to workout, section to section. 300 milligrams of phosphatidylserine nightly, usually about 6 p.m., is a great way to just crush cortisol levels without really tinkering with anything else. Again, that's a Band-Aid. That's not going to solve adrenal issues or recover them, help them be more balanced, but it will knock cortisol down pretty nicely and could get you sleepy, so be mindful of that. All right, our drift and fuel stability, we talked about that. couple different ways within this guy here. Again, things that we want to look at for that is glucose, HOMA-IR. That's a calculated measurement that we use for diabetics and people with insulin resistance. You take your glucose and your fasting insulin, you plug it into some cute little algorithm that you can Google online, and it stands for homeostatic measurement assessment of insulin resistance. It'll basically tell us how well your cells are sucking in sugar, and if there's any resistance to that, that will 100% affect your ability to recover from workouts, as well as be fueled for upcoming events or next day training. Triglycerides and HDL, basic cholesterol profile, huge impact. Testosterone and estrogen will affect those directly and somewhat indirectly, which can then affect how well your liver is processing those and doing what they need to do to have effective energy and cellular regeneration. High drift, meaning you're going there way too fast, way too soon in a workout, and you're having a lot of carbs and you're not going to process any fat. Too fasted zone 2 cycles or fast walks, incline walks, anything like that a week can help kind of nudge that in the opposite direction. Fasted is key. Semi-fasted would just be like a little bit of cream in your coffee before you go out for your walk or run. This one's less applicable. Let's see. We got time. All right, cost at 75% of your VO2 max. Plainer terms that I put in there for you: how much gas do I burn to cruise at 3/4 of my maximal output, or you could say 70%, whatever the case may be. Gomar kind of talked about that earlier. There's an effective dose on here. It sits in and around that zone 2. Zone 2 is classically measured, like depending on who you're hearing it from or what wearable, it could be anywhere from 60 to 75% in there. So that falls into a higher sustainable area of that energy. Everybody knows if you have a newer car, you know how you got like power mode and like economy mode, right? Like you put economy mode on, your car has no pickup, right? You're just hitting the gas, you're like, all right, we're almost up to 20, right? And then you finally get there and you're at a red light, and you're like, damn it, I gotta slow down now. But you take that off and you go on power mode and you have a real fast pickup. You can accelerate a lot quicker. This is basically looking at that in a sense of how much energy, right? Because when you go into power mode, you're blowing through gas a lot faster. When you're going on economy mode, it's like, we're not picking up speed too fast, we got a good slope, right? And we're not burning too much energy, and we're using essentially in the sense of the body, the right type of fuel. Where in this version, if you go into power mode, you're kind of gonna go, right? And you're gonna use up all your energy. That's not a great line, but you guys get from my sound effects that was appropriate. So for this, we're looking at homocysteine, zinc, selenium from blood markers, making sure that those guys are in line. High homocysteine means that you got a leaky fuel tank, your red blood cells aren't working appropriately, your B12 and B9 are probably off. You might be a crappy methylator, sorry. Welcome to the club, 50% of the population are. Adding in about 400 micrograms of folate stacked with selenium and zinc can be benefit to help with that. Again, start with RDAs on that. Run your nutrition through Chronometer. Get 80 plus nutrients or whatever they're at these days that it breaks down for you. See where you're missing, fill in those gaps first, see how you feel, make adjustments based off of that. Slope and breathing economy. This is specifically the line that we're talking about here and how fast that heart rate accelerates. Albumin, which is a transporter, as well as binds and moves around some different hormones that are fat soluble, along with CO2, making sure those are good. Low albumin, low buffer. You're also probably holding on a lot of water. Albumin is great for osmotic pull of water and keeping water where it's supposed to be. So outside of estrogen and poor thyroid control, if albumin's off, you're going to probably retain a lot of water and look a little fluffier, weigh in a little heavier, make gymnastics harder, make all that pounding on running a little tougher on the body. 15 grams of whey at breakfast, good way to start that, and make sure that everything from a amino acid level is covered, since it's a good source of all of our primaries. This one's way too much. We're going to skip it. You can read over it. It's kind of fun. Recovery and lactate clearing. We talked about this. Blood lactate levels, potassium and magnesium. I actually covered those nicely for you. I will say, looking at lactate levels or on occasion lactose dehydrogenase in your blood panel can be effective. We look at lactate for a lot of our people that have poor oxygen flow. So you look at a SpO2 monitor and they're constantly, I mean, clinically, we only get concerned when it's below 95, but most people are sitting around 100 or 99. If I have someone that's always in between 96 and 97, we'll run lactate levels. I've had people walk in the door with lactate levels of like 13. And again, when we were talking about before, our contentious number was anything over 7, you're not really clearing it very well. And these are people with like poor cardiovascular health, can't move it, they're not getting a lot of oxygen, and they're really not burning fat whatsoever. And more of a clinical issue, but taking care of those things, making sure that your buffering system is dialed in, you got the right nutrients, and again, magnesium biglycinate, a little fancier version if you want to throw more money at it, is helpful in helping draw that in the right direction. Man, I did a lot more slides than I remember. You guys, am I losing anybody? Dialed. All right. Let's see what else is. Oh, look at that. We didn't even get it everywhere. Self-assessment. Developing your fat max number. So what I recommend, if nobody has access to a VO2 max or can't get one done, take 180 minus your age, get on a treadmill, work up to that. Whatever that, and like for this matter, I suggest an old school treadmill where you can set the what is it called, speed on it. Blanking on words now. Set the speed to it once you get to that number, and you just hold that speed for about 25 minutes. You look at your data afterwards, and you look at what your heart rate drift was from that. So we want that to be probably about 5 to 8 max. 5 BPM shift from that would mean like you're in a pretty solid spot for your fat max as an estimate. If it peaks before 15 minutes, like you way overestimated and you're going too hot. Otherwise, if it never really gets there and you feel like you could keep going for hours, you probably want a little bit too low. So at least you can start to play with that, check it in every now and then, over and underestimate that and dial in where that number is. And if you want to just improve on your ability to burn fat as a fuel source at the highest intensity before you start working too many carbs in, you just hang out and you do your easy recovery work at that number. That could be on a bike, walking, whatever you want to do. You retest it every 6 weeks if you're so inclined.
So what is the HR drift?
That's like your as work becomes hard, since the variable of speed is locked, your body's going to have to start working harder eventually. And within that like 15 to 25 minute window, you don't want it to go higher than 5 BPMs. And then that would kind of secure that your pretty good estimated fat max number. Off-season playbook, at least 2 zone 2s, 1 sprint, 2 mixed modal pieces per week just to keep playing the game. Mesocycles, if you have 3 to 4 month cycles, it'd be ideal to run lab work at the end of each one of those to be able to check on anything within those parameters of areas that you saw that may have been issues within your general performance. Keep your polyunsaturated fats low. If we broke everything down, I think between the metrics that you can extract from your respiratory exchange rate that comes from a VO2 max test, along with all those blood markers, you got probably 80 plus different things you could look at. So again, pick one thing, focus on improving that. Talk to your coach. If you don't have a coach, then pick 1 or 2 things, track those over the period of your off season, hone in on that, and make sure that you're doing the appropriate work to make those adjustments and improve those areas so that you have a bigger foundation and a stronger aerobic system, and then start to put mixed work into that. Because at the end of the day, if you can't, I know running is only really specific at the higher levels of CrossFit as far as sports specificity and exercise selection, but my argument would be if you can't run for 20 minutes at a moderately high sustainable level, what makes you think you can do a bunch of mixed work like that? Just because y'all got like all the grit in the world, I know I'm not like pooing on that, But from a training standpoint, you know, you can go back to like, you got to crawl before you can walk, walk before you can run before you can jump. And just because we can jump doesn't mean that we can, right? And that would be like, mixed work would be at the top of that pyramid for me. So you'd want to secure each one of those foundations. And until I'm proved wrong, I mean, I'd be happy to be, but I would say the best progression would be setting your VO2 max. If it's under 35, get it up. Get it as close to 50 as you can in the time that you have. Then at that point, test your rowing VO2 max. I think that's between deep knee, deep knee and deep hip flexion, hinging and pulling, and upper like shoulder rotation, elbow flexion. That's as close as we're going to get, in my opinion, to mixed modal work while still being on a machine and monostructural. And you don't have the heart rate variation that you're going to get from a ski erg. Maybe one person out of 1,000 can keep swimming aerobic, so that's kind of off the table as well. So using that, getting a VO2 max for your row, and then trying to close that delta on those two as much as possible and get your row VO2 max as close to your running VO2 max, and then introduce more mixed work on top of that. And in I don't know how much time, I think Gomar is going to be the guy to go to figure out how to fix that problem, and you guys are all going to be champions. So it's a win-win. And you check your blood work, you fix all those deficiencies, and we have a room full of champions here. There's probably like 10 more. Oh, that was it. That was the last slide. You guys got a lot of work to do. Yeah, 5 minutes. Questions? Yes, sir.
You talked about.
No, I didn't. No, I'm kidding. What?
You talked about free radical damage and then oxidative stress.
Yeah.
But there's antioxidants, so what other ways can you combat that?
Vitamin E is the best thing I've seen clinically work for specifically what we're talking about, because vitamin E is the fatty acid antioxidant. So when you have a free radical, it goes around stealing electrons and destabilizing the molecules. Vitamin E will come in and patch that up and restabilize. It's still not going to be perfect, but even if you have cells made of polyunsaturated fatty acids, vitamin E, or you ate a meal out and you're like, God knows what's in this thing, and probably a bunch of seed oils. You throw in like a higher dose, like 300 milligrams of vitamin E with that, mixed tocopherols, and it's going to like basically safety net all those incoming fatty acids and make sure that they're not too damaging. If your body chooses to use those to build cells or membranes, it's not going to be nearly as bad.
Can you get it from food?
Vitamin E's, yeah. I mean, the foods that have it aren't that great. You're going to eat like wheat germ, and like weird stuff like that, right? It's just not a super abundant thing, and that's why the RDA on it's pretty low, unfortunately. But that would be my go-to for it. All the other antioxidants, you're like forcing besides C, majority of them are phytotoxins in a sense that make your body produce more antioxidants rather than actually being antioxidants themselves. Yes, sir.
What about vitamin D? And also, you mentioned testosterone, like obviously it should be like at healthy levels, but everyone is different. Everyone's levels are different. Like what's healthy for one person is not good for like another. I have like 300 or 400, I don't remember, and I feel good. And how do you get it up naturally?
Rest and stop crossfit fitting. No, I'm half kidding. Okay, vitamin D. Clinically, we try to get everybody between about 50 and 70, assuming they don't have any osteoporosis, parathyroid hormone issues, anything like that. All of their bone DEXA, calcium levels, no history of like cardiac issues are all solid. Calcium levels are good. 60 to 70 would be really good. You get inflammation modulation, you get an enhancement on your immune system. If you have any autoimmune stuff, it tones that down while still being able to effectively fight off infections and things like that. So vitamin D is key. We know there's vitamin D receptors on the ovaries and testes, so there's an impact on hormonal levels based off of those as well. High inflammation is going to drain it as well, so that's really easy for a CrossFitter. You guys are inflamed all the time. Testosterone is very subjective. Clinically, I've seen people in the 700s and they have every symptom of low T. They may have low receptors, or they have a high high total testosterone and trash-free testosterone. So, or you could, in your case, you could have low total testosterone but a higher free and be totally fine. Other people just have lower amounts of receptors, so they need higher amounts to improve probability of binding and so on and so forth. So improving that really comes down to a lot of the markers that we talked about being dialed in, reducing stress, because cortisol levels at abundance are the number one thing that's going to shut down your reproductive axis, male or female. So by decreasing cortisol, having it seasonal for you, controlled, compartmentalized, however you want to think about it, it's going to be have the highest benefit for better sexual health across the board for all those things. Yes?
Kind of like going and break like what you just said. The thing that you said was kind of like the Band-Aid for the cortisol, like the 300 milligram.
Phosphatidylcholine?
So like you were saying, basically that will help lower cortisol, but it's kind of a Band-Aid. I know the whole thing you just talked about, like to fix the root of the issue, would you just say like eat more of the right foods, rest, like stop training as hard, like all the thyroid stuff that you were talking about,
Yeah.
that like the low T, the low body temperature. Personally, I had to deal with all that stuff, but some of my numbers are good, but a lot of that stuff is low. Basically, you're just saying eat more and stop training as hard.
So eat more generally, because most when I was seeing a lot more clients at Mayhem, I was looking at everybody's like food intakes, and y'all don't eat. Like it's insane. We run resting metabolic rate or respiratory quotient in our clinic, and we're like, you breathe into a tube for 10 minutes, and it tells you basically extrapolates how many calories you burn based off of the carbon exhaling across like a 10 to 12 minute period, and then extrapolates it across basically 18 hours plus or 16 hours plus 8 hours of sleeping, and like people's total calories are below their resting metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories you need to like lay on the couch and like pick your nose. You guys don't pick your nose, so you don't have to worry about that, so it's a little less energy, but like it's so low that virtually all the people I see are under eating, and they feel well fueled. So imagine if you actually had enough food, right? So ensuring that you can reverse diet up to the highest amount of calories without any weight gain would be the first approach. Sleeping more, and then making sure that there's nothing wrong with hard training. What's wrong with training is doing hard training too frequently and too long and non-periodized. Whether you want to follow a nonlinear program or a very linear program or a concurrent plan or whatever, it needs to have peaks and valleys and have some level of periodization so that you're not running your head into the wall every single day for a long period of time. That's what's going to cause overtraining, the high cortisol. But then the other missing link is like, what are you doing in the time that you're not in the gym? Are you setting fires in your life? Are you putting fires out in your life? Like, what does work look like? I've had clients that literally made lateral moves in jobs from one company to another, took a $20,000 pay grade, their complete hormonal profile changed, lost weight, became more athletic, all because they changed jobs, because their job was that stressful. And the administration they were up against didn't allow for that person to actually make the changes and be happy in that position. So all of that stuff comes together, and being an athlete and having a life outside of that and not being a pro athlete poses a lot of difficulty on that, because you have more variables in your life that you have to constantly correct for, because you need to secure income and humans if you have kids or spouses, whatever the case may be. Does that help?
Yeah.
You gotta go.
I gotta go. Last thing, guys.